Welcome to Strategic Outlook Web TV. I am Yusuf ÇINAR, President of Strategic Outlook. Our guest is Professor İftikhar Malik from Bad Sapa University, also Wolfson College, Oxford. We will talk about political Islam and Orientalism. Welcome to Mr. Malik's Strategic Outlook.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be in this historic city, Konya, and a country which is almost a leader of the Muslim world, Turkey. And I'm in the city of Maulana, who originally was born in my neighborhood in Afghanistan. And many thanks to Seljuk University and also to your department especially for inviting me to give a talk and to be able to exchange my views and opinions with your worthy colleagues.
Thank you very much for your time. My question, firstly, political Islam. You know, especially some Western countries, some Western people, their perception relating with political Islam, a threat to the political stability of current regimes in the Middle East. Some people perceptions a threat to world peace, political Islam, according to them. What is political Islam? What do you think about it?
Yusuf, I think that Islam has been an area of great interest historically and as a religion, all the way from the very beginning and especially during the medieval period. But I think from the colonial period, say from late 18th, early 19th century, there has been interest in understanding Islam as a kind of political system. And these colonial narratives talk about Islam being very political, and they focus on the biography of the Prophet and how he created a state in Medina, which eventually became Khilafat, and all the way to the end of Ottoman Caliphate, when Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. So that was the historical interest. But when these former colonies became independent Muslim countries, their leaders, most of their leaders, talked about a historical past that the Muslims had until the European colonialism, took control of most of these Muslim countries. So Islam came into political idiom of these political parties and in the textbooks and in sort of making these countries into cohesive nations. But I think from 1980s, especially after the Iranian Revolution and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, people started talking about political Islam. Initially, people were a bit confused. They thought modernists in the Muslim world will not be interested in Islam. And the Muslims will be talking about westernization, modernization. But with the Iranian Revolution, people realized that Islam was a very potent political force. And when the Afghan Mujahideen fought against the Soviet Union and most of the Muslim countries and the Western countries started supporting them, they realized that political Islam was a reality. And then in Central Asia, the independence movement amongst all the 6 or 7 countries which emerged in the 1990s with the end of Soviet Union. And then in Pakistan and many Muslim countries like Malaysia and then in North Africa. And so religio-political parties started talking about political Islam. Some of these moderate people amongst the Muslims, the intellectuals, the leaders, they thought they could marry Islam with democracy, with human rights, with technology, with modern education. So to them that was a kind of political Islam. But some Muslims thought that no, we have to have a break with modernity and we got to go back to our puritanical roots. And some of these organizations, I think, taking maybe the Iranian models, they thought that especially the Sunni Muslim states should become Islamic. And then 9/11 happens. And 9/11 then unleashes lots of interest in these different forms of political Islam. So many people superficially feel that political Islam is one monolith. It has different manifestations. There are Taliban, there are Pakistani Taliban, there are Afghan Taliban. That's a different kind of political Islam. Then we have Shia Islam, the lead movements like Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's another kind of political Islam. Then we have Muslim Brotherhood, Ikhwan al-Muslimin, who are banned in many Muslim countries. And like in Egypt, they were banned in 2011 after the military coup. And that was also defined as political Islam. So I think political Islam has different kind of manifestation. In some cases it is militant, in some cases it is moderate, but I think it is mixing of Islam and politics together, and to transform the system of the state and the social values according to kind of Islamic view that these political parties or militant organizations propound. So we have 2 or 3 levels of political Islam. Parties which want to use ballot to bring about change in the government, in the society, like Jamaat Islami in Pakistan, Jamiyat Ulama-e-Hind, Jamiyat Ulama-e-Islam in Pakistan, or Nadwa party in Indonesia. But then we have Muslim party groups, groups of political Islam which are militant, like ISIL, like the Taliban, or Al-Qaeda, who want to use force not only against non-Muslim forces, but against fellow Muslim forces and Muslim regimes. And in your own country, you have Aqib Party, you have Saadat Party, and several other parties which are talking about changing the society and the state structure according to their vision and perception of Islam. But outside the Muslim world, there is quite a bit of misunderstanding of political Islam. And it's generally viewed as a kind of militant, once militant kind of manifestation. And this is a problem. They think it's one big monolithic identity. And they don't realize that under political Islam there are different kind of manifestations, different kind of ideologies, different kind of strategies. So political Islam is a very attractive subject, and for the academics, for the journalists, even for the people who make films, and of course for the politicians all over the Muslim world, and in Europe, and in North America, and Australia. So political Islam is one of the buzzwords of the time, which sadly in most cases is reduced to militant Islam.
And Turkey's political Islam and westernization process, especially Huntington called Turkey as a turn country. What do you think about it?
I think people felt that Kemalism, which was given by Mustafa Kemal, the Turk can keep Turkey together, will make Turkey into a kind of European westernized country.
Yeah.
And people thought by cutting off with the connection with the history, with the Ottoman past, and by controlling ulama and by controlling Sufi taqiyas, Turkey will become a kind of totally pseudo-European, pseudo-Western culture. But people forgot to see the layers of different kind of ideological leanings within Turkish society. So Islam did not really die away in Turkey, and it started making news and it started making entry in the 60s, especially in the 70s, especially with lots of military coups that were happening in Turkey. And most of these military coups used Kemalism as an excuse.
Yes.
So I think political Islam started making its entry into Turkey. Initially it was difficult for the system, for the government, and for the people who spoke of secularism, who spoke of Kemalism, to accept these religio-political parties. And some of these religio-political parties were in a hurry. They wanted to transform. So there was a worry in the 1980s and in the 1990s that Turkey could sadly become a battleground between the secularists and these people, these sections of the society who were talking about some kind of mixture of Islam and modernity. So 1990s was a turning point. Slowly there was more space, and I think eventually, you have AKP now, Though I'm not saying that AKP is the solution for all the problems, the debate goes on. But outside Turkey, many people think, many Muslims think, Turkey never got good press, because of European Union, because of all the propaganda or whatever. But generally Muslim view is that Turkey is doing very well, and maybe Turkey is trying to find a balance between Islam and secularism. And maybe Turkey will become eventually a role model. Muslims were deeply disturbed last year when first time news started appearing that the Prime Minister at that time, Tayyip Erdogan, had put lots of impositions on police and judges, and all of a sudden people realized that there was a tension between the Gulen movement and the ruling party. And then they started talking, the Prime Minister, now the President, they started talking about a state within a state. So for many Muslims, whether they are living in Britain or Germany or America, and also in the Muslim world, in South Asia, Southeast Asia, North Africa, this was a sudden discovery that within this political Islam of Turkey, there is a division. So we hope that eventually through debate, through dialogue, through more democracy, more development, this political Islam finds a balancing point and it doesn't become a new polarization. Because earlier polarization appeared to be between the secularists and the people who talked of a kind of moderate form of Islam. But now there is a kind of tension within these different groups and parties of political Islam. So when Sam Huntington came up with his idea, he was talking about the Balkans because the Bosnian crisis was happening, Yugoslavia had fallen apart, and 6 new countries had come into being, and especially the Croats and Serbs were taking away the territory of Bosnia. And I went to Bosnia, I did a book, I was there last year. Bosnia was a kind of frontier state, and here were some groups who were very secular, but they couldn't, keep the country together. And then some Islamists came in. So Bosnia was seen by Sam Huntington as a battleground between Islamic civilization and the Western civilization. And he was very superficial because he thought Western civilization was only Judaic and Christian. He doesn't realize that Europe has already become very plural, and Islam is part of Europe in terms of history, in terms of Balkans, in terms of Turkey, in terms of Albania, and also in terms of people like me, the diaspora people who have moved from different countries into Europe. So looking at Europe only as a Christian kind of continent, and the Balkans, being the battleground between Islam and Christianity, I think that was a very superficial reading of contemporary politics. But remember, this is the time when religion became very important in Israel, in North America, and also in Europe and in the Muslim world, and also in India, the Bharatiya Janata Party. So I think Sam Huntington partly was right. He thought religion was coming back with vengeance. So politics was going to be impacted by religion. And it's not just the domestic politics, international relations as well. So he was partially right. But then he made it into he thought as if our whole history of human beings is history of conflicts. He didn't talk about commonalities, the things we share, whether we're Muslim or atheist or secularist or liberal or traditionalist. We also share. And civilizations have very fluid borders. You cannot draw a boundary for a civilization. So in that sense, I think Huntington exaggerated the conflicts, the political conflict, especially which were happening in the Muslim world, like in Chechnya, in Bosnia, or in Kashmir, or in Palestine, or in East Timor, in the Philippines, or in southern Thailand. So he thought these were actually religious/cultural conflicts, not really political.
Yes. You are living in England and outside Turkey. 17th December is very important day for Turkey, Gülen community. And what do you think about community, also Gülen community, and community-state relation?
I don't know much about the political ambitions of the party, Gulen movement. I always thought it was a movement, not a party, you know, because it has a kind of international, you know, existence. And in different countries it has different names. And Fatullah Gulen lives in Pennsylvania. And I read some of his articles. I watched an interview that he gave last year. And generally the view is that it's an educational movement. But my feeling is, as a student of history and contemporary Muslim politics, that all these movements begun in the name of reforms in Islam eventually become political. So I think Gulen movement is political. I don't know whether it was initially political or not, because it talked about education and, you know, in a kind of Sufi way, mystical way. So kind of combining modernity with tradition. But I think it has become political, like any other movement in the Muslim world, which initially begins as a religious movement, or as an educational movement, or as a cultural movement, but eventually it becomes political. And I'm not saying being political is negative. In India, for example, where a great debate happened, like your country under the Ottomans in the 19th century. So initially the movements amongst Indian Muslims were cultural movements, Anjuman as we call them. And later on these Anjuman became political, and then you had religious political parties like Muslim League or Jamiyat Ulama Hind and many more, all over India, all over the subcontinent. So we see Islam entering into politics through educational movement. So in that sense, I think Gulen movement to me is not shocking that it has political desire. But I think the Turks will have to decide, you know, where they can find a balancing point. At one level, I would say that like in Germany, like in Italy, like in many other European countries, we have parties which are called Christian Democrats. So in the Muslim world, if we could develop parties which could marry tradition with modern education, with equal rights for women, for minorities, and they could be democratic, and they could call themselves, you know, Islamic party or whatever, but as long as they participate in the politics of democracy, and they allow equality, and they accept pluralism, and they move forward, nothing wrong with that. I think any party, especially in the name of religion and politics, as long as it believes in ballot, I think we should give it a chance. And then the ordinary people should decide. This party should take its case to the people at large, whether it's Turkey or Pakistan or Morocco or Egypt. Any Muslim country, I would say, with the media, with education, with our women being so vocal, I would not underrate our ordinary people. If these parties take their programs to them, and then those people think about their program, and then they decide through election. But I'm deeply worried about the parties, Muslim parties, which use ballot, or which use the backdoor politics. And backdoor politics could be by using gun, by creating instability, or by trying to make inroads into the police or into the military, and then using those state organs to overthrow the elected government. I would not accept that. I think we should let the systems work. We should let the people go through electoral process. We should let the civil societies decide. And that's and if Gulen movement or any movement in any part of the Muslim world participates in a transparent way and puts itself in front of people for accountability, I would not stand in the way. But I'm deeply worried that there are lots of parties in the Muslim world which are using Islam, but they're also using violence of different forms. And this violence is not only against non-Muslims, but it is against fellow Muslims as well.
Violence, different form, could you open it?
Yeah, I mean, for example, sectarian violence, you know, Shia Sunni in Syria, in some extent in Iran, in Lebanon. I know in Pakistan we have 18 to 20% Muslims who are Shia, but you know, this is the traditional Shia Sunni coexistence. And the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, was a Shia. But you know, so Pakistan, there is anti-Shia sentiment among some people, but it is not a kind of organized movement against Shias. There are some hotheads, but generally Pakistan and India have been very plural, unlike Iran, unlike Saudi Arabia. And so we have to protect that pluralism. I think pluralism has to be protected by civil societies and by the state structures.
Pluralism is a problem for Islamic State. What do you think?
I think it is a challenge, it's not a problem, because even during the time of the Holy Prophet, if we go back to the time of Holy Prophet, when he signed the first civic charter, Medina, Misaqi Medina, Charter of Medina, first ever written document, Muslims were a small minority in Medina. Jews and non-Muslims were in majority. So I think we Muslims have to learn to live with ethnic and religious and sectarian differences. And this will come about with the debate, with democracy, with education, and I think with more responsible role by academics and by the media. Lots of our people are, young people have access to media. So I think these things should be debated. I know that many countries ideally like to create a mono-ethnic nationalism, like we saw in Germany in the 1930s, or in Italy. And there are these ultra-right forces in Europe today, very powerful. But I think we Muslims should not really fall into that kind of trap. We should protect our ethnic minorities and we should celebrate our pluralism. Because those minorities will be as patriotic as anybody else. We should not try to impose religious, sectarian, or ethnic uniformity upon our societies. And let those societies have equal opportunities so they become the stakeholders of our state system. If Turkey, for example, I'm just giving an example, if Turkey is looking after Alevis, if Turkey is looking after Kurds, if Turkey is looking after all kind of Turks, and if Turkey is looking after Turkoman or anybody who belongs to Turkey, those people will have their own interest in the development and in the peace and in the security of Turkey. Same way like Pakistan. If Pakistan is open to all kind of Pakistanis, whether they are Christians, they are Hindu, or they are Muslim minorities, they, for their own reasons, will be loyal to Pakistan. So I think pluralism is very difficult, but almost every country on earth is plural. And I think this is one of the greatest challenges, not only for Muslims, but for almost every society. I mean, even 40 years ago, even for women in Britain or Germany or these in America had fewer rights. And even the early migrants from this country to Germany, or migrants from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh to Britain, they did not have many rights. Sometimes people were very blatantly racist. They would not rent their homes. But now, slowly, gradually, they have built up laws which protect minorities. So these second or third generation immigrants are citizens in Germany, in Scandinavia, in France, in Britain. They're generally loyal for their own reasons to their home countries, new countries that they have adopted as homes. So my feeling is that in the Muslim world, where we are trying to create nationhood, we should allow all kind of breathing space and participation to our minorities, whether they are ethnic or sectarian. Otherwise, we'll have many more, Syrias, Iraqs, where people will go back to these identities and they will develop their own private militias. So we'll have lots of Muhajirin, as you're seeing in your own country, and I'm seeing in Pakistan with Muhajirin from Afghanistan for the last 40 years. So I think pluralism is a great challenge for Muslim countries, for Muslim societies. And we got to protect, and we got to celebrate, and we got to have regimes which respect plural societies and take them along.
I want to talk about Islamic extremism
Yeah.
and Islamic jihad.
Mm.
You know, Obama said that Islamic state organization, ISIL, not Islamic, he said that. And you know, ISIL nearly 10,000 Christian and Muslim people killed by ISIL in Iraq. What do you think about it?
I think, personally, I feel that this is an extreme form of political Islam, and it does not represent majority of Muslims, wherever they come from, even Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Pakistan, Indonesia, but they're there. I think the challenge is how to handle them. First, I think the problem has been of the failure of the states, the state of Iraq and the state of Syria, and to some extent for Lebanon. They fell apart. So first of all, we need to protect the states, good or bad, they have come into being. People romanticize old history of the Ottomans when they talk of the province of Mosul, the province of Baghdad, and the province of Basra. How Ottomans were able to keep all these people together. We can't go back in history. Now we got these states, so-called tribes. So first of all, I think we need these states, good or bad, territorial state to survive. Number two, wherever there has been an external intervention, those states have exploded, post-colonial states. I can see Somalia, I can see Afghanistan, I can see Yugoslavia, and I can see Iraq. So external intervention under any excuse or the bad news, because there is a reaction, there is fragmentation. Number three, Obama talks about the threat, which may be true, but his threat perception is only confined to the Western world, which is again very opportunistic. These people have killed fellow Muslims and non-Muslims, Yazidis and Christians. So they are a threat. So they're not just a threat to Western journalists or aid workers, which is sad. They should not have killed anybody, and they shouldn't kill anybody. But they have killed lots of people. How do you handle them? I think using drone technology or aerial bombing, I'm not really sure that will help. Because in Afghanistan, we have seen, and in the tribal regions of Pakistan, they have been using drones for years, since 2005. 9 years have they been able to get rid of Taliban. They might have killed some selective leaders, but in the process, lots of civilians have been killed. Women and children have been killed. And more local people have been recruited as radicals. So my feeling is that the military strategy, as the only strategy, is not very helpful. My fifth question is that already Middle East is sadly divided in Shia and Sunni groups, blocks. Iran is involved. Some of my Syrian friends and Iraqi friends say that Iranian troops are involved in Syria, and they help, Hezbollah, and of course they help, the government in Baghdad, Maliki government or the new government. So I don't know how to disengage Iran, because Iran has insecurity. Iran feels it's surrounded by Sunnis. At another level, I think we need to disengage Arab countries, which in the name of Sunni Islam help Sunni militant groups in the Middle East. So I think this is where I'm worried about external intervention. I think Iran and other Muslim countries, including Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and like your country, Turkey, we should help on a human level. We should help the Muhajirin, we should help the displaced people. But we should not bet on these different horses which are fighting in Iraq and in Syria. Because if I support one particular group in Iraq today or in Syria, you, as my rival, as my neighbor, would support another, and there's going to be no end to it. So I would ideally like to see United Nations to play the role of a peacemaker. It is not. It has failed us in Rwanda, it has failed us in Yugoslavia, it has failed us in Chechnya, it has failed us in this recent tension between Russia and Ukraine. It has failed us in the issue between Azerbaijan and Armenia. It has failed us in Iraq. It could have stopped the war, invasion of Iraq in 2003, which was illegal, immoral. It could have done something about Afghanistan after 9/11 and all the 35, 36 countries got together and attacked a poor, underdeveloped country like Afghanistan, already ravished by war. So I think Obama and the 5 permanent members of the United Nations should honestly empower the United Nations. Number 2, I think Organization of Islamic Conference, if it is only to meet and to give speeches and to offer fatihah or prayer, that's not the purpose. OIC should redefine itself. Number 3, I think Arab League should at least put some life into its history. It has been one of the oldest blocs of the countries, Arab countries. Every time there is a crisis, interstate crisis in the Arab world, Arab League is not there.
What is the main problem in the Islam world?
I think main problem is that some people would say that we became countries before we became nations. So one problem is that we have to develop our national identities. I don't know whether we take the secular view or Islamist view or something in between, or So one problem is that somehow our nationhood has to be evolved in a way where my neighbor is safe from my project. I think the way colonial states created our borders, we got divided. And those issues of divided population, divided resources, and divided loyalties. What is the way forward? We can't undo this history now. We can't have Khilafah, and we can't have the empires. So what do we have? The states. I think regional grouping. I think RCD, like Regional Cooperation Development Treaty between Turkey, Iran, and Pakistan was very good. But sadly, it was done with the push by the Americans and the British. Now is the time that Turkey should take a leading role. And Turkey is very well poised. It has good relationship with Iran, first time in a long time. Pakistanis support Turkey. Afghans have got wonderful feelings, warmth for Turkey. And I'm sure lots of Arab people, including the refugees and the people who are back there in Syria and Lebanon and Iraq, your neighbors, they also look at you with envy. Because you're developing, and more than developing, you're peaceful. To have a peaceful country itself is a great achievement. So Turkey, Indonesia, Malaysia, Morocco, Senegal, some of the most peaceful countries in the Muslim world. And I think they should take initiatives to resolve these conflicts slowly, gradually. The conflicts which are happening between Muslim states. So I think my feeling is, I mean, some people say, oh, Turkey wants to become under your leader, Tayyip Erdogan, maybe Turkey wants to become another Osmani. No, I think Turkey has the potential. Turkey is an example. I mean, people like me coming to Turkey, we can see education, we can see civic facilities improving, we see peace, we see stability, we see gender rights more than any other Muslim country. I mean, Bosnia may have more gender rights and more education, but Bosnia doesn't have peace, it's not secure. Turkey has got so many potentials that I think Turkey is a role model. Not only for non-Arab countries, but also for Arab countries. So you play a role which is responsible, which is non-interventionist, And you provide a platform where these Muslim leaders, whether they're religious leaders, militant leaders, or political leaders, they come on their own, sit, have discussion, have dialogue. Begin like that. Allow them to talk to one another. I would say even Saudi Arabia and Irani leadership, ask them to come and talk to each other so that it does not become another conflict between Sunnis and Shias. So Turkey's role, I think you are ideally placed. Don't underrate your potential and don't underrate the goodwill that the Muslims in the world have for you.
And what do you think about Turkish secularist system? What do you think about it?
I think most of the
Is
Muslims
role model for Arab countries?
Yeah, I think there is lots of misunderstandings amongst Muslims, ordinary Muslims, and some educated Muslims. They think secularism means closing down mosques, closing down, places of Islamic learning. I think Muslims, especially who live in minority countries, as Muslim minorities, they appreciate secularism. The largest number of Muslims who support secularism are in India. About 200 million Muslims, for their own reasons, they support secularism. You got 80 million plus Muslims. And we Muslims living in Europe, in America, we also support kind of secular system. And remember, 40% of world's Muslims live as Muslim minorities. Russia has more Muslims than Syria and Iraq put together. So most of these Muslims, for their own reasons, they practice and they protect secularism. Why? Because to them secularism means equality on the basis of your religious identity, on the basis of your citizenship. And no one religion or one community would dominate the rest. This kind of secularism is more like Indian secularism, not like French secularism.
Yeah.
So I think your secularism and Indian secularism, they sort of, to me now, they kind of resemble. They have threat from within to that secularism. And you might have threats from within as well.
Maybe if we were 10 years ago, we can talk about Kemalist secularist system in Turkey, because Kemalist secularism, like French secularism.
Yeah.
But now it's changing.
It's changing. I think there's a kind of redefinition of Islam and secularism. I think I would call it Muslim secularism. I think this is the way forward. And also I think like feminism, there's something like Muslim feminism, where these women and men, scholars and writers from Muslim world, Turkey, Bosnia, Morocco, and Muslim women living in the West, they feel that Islam allows rights to women. And rather than banishing Islam, we re-understand Islam. So same way I think secularism has to be re-understood. Generally there's a misconception amongst Muslims, mostly by religious parties and their propaganda. And also because when Kamal introduced Jadidiyat and republicanism, generally people thought, oh, Mustafa Kamal was getting rid of Islam. And now, a generation later, they realize Islam is as strong and as powerful as it ever was in Turkey. It's not banished. Number two, Turks are as good Muslim as anybody else. And number three, Turkey has moved forward. It's the most powerful economy amongst the Muslims, which is not just dependent on one or two commodities like oil. It has diverse economy. And number four, Turkey is peaceful. And number five, Turkey is practicing democracy. And number six, Turkey has, I'm amazed even in a place like Konya, Anatolia. Which is outside Turkey is supposed to be a very conservative place. Women have rights, women have equality, they share jobs, they go to the schools. Some of them are wearing modern clothes, some of them are wearing scarves, so they have choices. Men don't stare at them, men don't use abusive language against women, and I've seen women walking here late at night on their own. I think this is a wonderful achievement, which should be known, which should be accepted, and which should be by Muslims, the rest of the world. We have problems of gender equality in the Muslim world. I think this is a very big issue, and you are ahead of many other Muslim countries in that area. So I think Turkey, in that sense, has achieved lots of things. So what we want is that Turkey should stay on this path. So Turkey should become a role model, and eventually the rest of the people, follow this Turkish model of development, of equal rights, of pluralism, being modern and Muslim at the same time. I think this is the best way to reject this thesis of clash of civilization by practice, through our example, through empowering ourselves, through trusting our own people. And I think this will happen. Education, economy, mobility, self-questioning, having dialogue and discussion across the board, I think eventually it will take us there. Though I know most of the time the news about Pakistan, about Islam, about Turkey is negative, and lots of our young people get affected by it. But I think for our own reasons, we have to look inwardly and we have to move forward. So I am very hopeful in that sense.
Also, I want to talk about Orientalism. According to Edward Said, Orientalism provided a rationalization process for European colonialism. What do you think about it?
I think Edward Said wrote his book and gave his interviews on this very important subject at the right time and right in the heart of America, at Columbia University, where he was teaching. He made a major contribution. I think in 20th century, a scholar like him was a rarity. It developed into critical theory, it developed into a debate. Hundreds of thousands of books have been written, articles, whatever. It created lots of intellectual debate. And some people, most of the people agreed with him. Like people agreed with Franz Fanon and such other scholars before Edward Said. So most of the people in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, and even people from the liberal left in Europe and North America agreed with him. Some people thought that he was simplifying these complex problems of underdevelopment in the former colonies by putting all the responsibility on the colonial empires. So some people became very defensive. And in the late 80s and early 90s, we saw a trend where people like Niall Ferguson and others started celebrating the empire. And in their books, in their articles, they have been suggesting that countries like Britain or France, the imperial powers, created new states and new societies and helped develop places like India or Africa and brought them into the 20th century. So these writers, these historians, these political analysts feel that we in Western Europe should not be feeling guilty for our ancestors having ruled or misruled. But I think issues of slavery, issues of racism, issues of class formation, and eventually decolonization and the territorial demarcation of the colonies. These are some of the very, very negative legacies, and I think he talked about it. I am studying some of the books and diaries and letters about Pashtuns in Afghanistan and northern Pakistan during the colonial period. Edward Said did not have access to those, or did not have time, because he generally focused on Arab Middle East, a little bit on Muslim India, but not any particular community other than the Arabs. How these Muslims were presented, portrayed, misperceived. And when I look at those hundreds and thousands of articles and books and diaries written about Pashtuns, Afghans, I strongly believe in what Edward Said said. It was partly a military relationship. And, Britain tried to capture Afghanistan 3 times. First Anglo-Afghan War in 1838, second one in the late 19th century, the third one in 1919, and the fourth one is the ongoing, which is the longest war that many of these countries have fought in their histories. So what came up Along with these military adventures was lots of writings in the newspapers, in the books, as we see it after 9/11, by personal kind of views and impressions. Now we have TV, radio, newspapers, and they're full of caricatures, stereotypes of Muslims and Pathans and Pashtuns. And Taliban become Pashtuns, and Pashtun becomes a kind of symbol of a Muslim, a turban man with a beard who is out to destroy the world. So in that form, Orientalism has been a powerful reality, and it affected the colonized world, and it also impacted the colonial world, the colonizing world, their views about non-Western world. For example, the word Turk was used for Muslim for centuries. And I think it was to do with the Seljuks, because that's the time when the Crusades started, and they met Seljuks here, the Crusaders, from France, from Germany, from Italy, and from England. So they thought every Muslim was a Turk. And then the Ottomans had very interesting relationship with the Tudors, Queen Elizabeth I, and they thought all Muslims were Turks. So the name Turk became a kind of substitute for being Muslim. And this is not just a Western thing. I mean, in India, the Muslims came from Central Asia. Many of them were Turkic people, or Afghans, or Central Asians. They were also called Turks. And until recently, the Muslims in India were described as Turks. So I think this kind of simplification, and then what do you mean by a Turk? A particular physical kind of caricature of a Turk. Islam, violence, Turk, they all were juxtaposed. So in that sense, I think these images do permeate and do persist, and groups like Taliban, group like ISIL, or Boko Haram, when they do these violent things, those stereotypes are reinforced, and that's where I think it becomes new Orientalism. But to some extent, these militant Muslims become the poster boys for the Muslims all over the world, who in most cases are like anybody else, peaceful, minding their own business.
Last 2 months, when I watch CNN International, especially they are using Middle East news. ISIL militants executing
Western
journalists, and they are using. We can define this process as a new Orientalism.
Very right. Yeah.
Do you agree with me?
Yeah, because it reinforces, sadly, those misimages that many Western, societies had, and which started going down, and then they came up. I think especially after 1979, with Ayatollah Khomeini coming into Iran, and the Shah was considered to be a modernizer and a good friend of the West. So I think that was the turning point. But then there was a little bit of confusion. Why? Okay, Khomeini was a bad man, from Western viewpoint. But then the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, wearing beard and turban, fighting the evil empire, the Soviet Union were good guys. So Western public opinion was confused. If you wanted to idealize Muslims, then you had the Afghans. But if you wanted to demonize Muslims, then you had the Ayatollahs. But I think after 9/11, demonization became easy. And I think in that sense, these militant groups in almost every Muslim country, sadly, by committing these kind of crimes against innocent people, and also in Spain and in Britain, I think they reinforce those. So I think we have a serious problem of reaching out to the people and letting them know that we are normal people like anybody else. Muslims are normal people like anybody else. And I think people are shocked when they come to Turkey. Why? It's peaceful. Number 2, women in huge numbers are on the streets, in the universities, in the offices. And they're running the country almost.
You can find a
Yeah.
lot of women driver.
Yeah. Earlier people thought, oh, Turkey was superficial,
Yeah.
trying to be Western without being Western. But Turkey, I mean, education, women's participation in public life, they have not divorced themselves from Islam, and they have proved the fact that you could create a balance between Islam and modern life. And modern life is not just technology, modern life is Western clothes, modern life is adopting all those kinds of institutions, eradicating poverty and eradicating exploitation. And I think Turkey, in that sense, is an example how things can be negotiated. We can't impose modernity on our societies the way we can't impose traditions on them by force. I think we have to find a synthesis. Imtizaj, I think, is a Turkish word. Some meeting. Relevant societies will have to decide. I mean, in Africa, we always hear about that, famines, tribal wars. But look at countries like Senegal. Muslim majority country, practicing democracy. And I come across Muslims from Senegal and Muslims like Muslims from Turkey. So I think we have these success stories. But the media and academia and the politicians sadly are focused on militant groups.
Yeah.
So the success stories of... I wrote something back to my colleagues the other day. I said, even in Pakistan and India, it's very difficult for a woman to travel, after certain hours of the evening, not to walk alone. But in Turkey, a Muslim country, it is safe. I mean, no society is 100% perfect, but I think women's participation here, whether you go to the Rosa of Maulana Rome, or you go to Shah Shams Mazar, or you go to the university, or you go to the cafeteria, or you're riding the tram, or you're flying in an aircraft, or you go to the Christian places in Cappadocia. Women, whether they are Western women, or they're women from China on their own, or they're Turkish women, they're all safe. And they're walking around. So I think this country has created lots of space for its people. So I think young people, if they're listening to me, the Turks, they should feel good about themselves as Muslims, as Turks, as members of a society which is very plural, which is a bridge between East and West, between North and South. So we have lots of hopes from Turkey, and I hope that whether these are my Kemalist friends or these are religious political friends from Saadat Party, from Gulen Party, from Akin, they all act more responsibly. They don't rock the boat. They differ, but they should agree on the consensus where Turkey should move forward, where Turkey should remain peaceful, and where the change should come through ballot, not through bullet. And Turkey, I mean, we all, we are proud of Turkey, not because of historical reason, but what Turkey has been achieving despite all the tensions. I mean, I go back to Turkey, at the time of the war. People are, talking about First World War. Hundreds of books have been written, hundreds of TV programs in the West, France, Britain, America, Germany. But what was the state of Turkey at that time? The Balkan War had happened. Turkey was almost going to be wiped out. And people in India and elsewhere, the Muslims were worried. But your role, Gallipoli, and then how you protected it, and how you took care of all kind of threats, whether they were coming from Greece or they were coming from the north, Armenia, Russia, whatever. You kept yourself together, and one generation, I think you got to give credit to that generation of the founders of Turkey, who single-mindedly, single-handedly kept the peace and kept the country going. Second World War, you had lots of pressure. But Ismet Inonu tried to remain neutral. And now, 2003, They wanted to use your airspace. Your parliament decided not to allow the airspace. So Turkey is a very sovereign country. Turkey is, earlier the image was, oh, Turkey was ruled by Kemalists, Islamists. There's no Islamic kind of space for Islamic practices. And number two, Turkey will follow America. This was the view. So in the 3 A's, Army, America, and Allah. Army and America were the most powerful. But now you take your own decisions. All these 3 A's have redefined roles in Turkey. And I think that's a great achievement, which we in Pakistan, or in Malaysia, or in North Africa, or in the Middle East, in your neighborhood.
The Taliban is a predominantly Pashtun. Taliban is a fundamentalist group. So, what do you think about future of Afghanistan, political future of Afghanistan?
After looking at the situation in Syria and Iraq in your neighborhood, many people are, rather pessimistic that the troops would leave, Americans and NATO, and Afghans will come back to that kind of chaotic lifestyle because Kabul will be threatened and Taliban will feel reinvigorated. And number two, Taliban, as you said, are Pashtuns, and Pashtuns have grudge against Tajiks and Uzbeks and Hazaras, the other communities, ethnic communities, who generally were seen to be helping the NATO forces. So I think unless there is a consensus between all these different ethnic communities, there is a worry. I don't know whether Americans and the NATO leaders are really, learning from Iraq, would put their efforts to get all kind of Taliban, groups together. Last year there was some stories that maybe Americans were holding talks with some Taliban leaders, what they call the good Taliban, in Qatar. But I think Afghanistan goes into the background now because there is more emphasis on Syria and ISIL and Iraq. My feeling is that, first of all, Afghans themselves should not follow the politics of revenge. And here, India, and especially Pakistan, and maybe even Turkey, and Uzbekistan, and China, I think these are the neighbors, and Iran, if they could get involved, they should play a kind of non-interventionist role of bringing different ethnic factions together. Number two, I think the Afghan government, we don't know, the election results have not been announced. This is a big controversy. Elections happen in April, and both the leaders, both the candidates, Ghani and Abdullah, they claim to be the winners. So we don't know. I think this thing has to be sorted out. So I think Afghanistan, looking at it historically, has stayed as a country because the neighbors around Afghanistan agreed on its status quo. So Iran, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Turkey, Tajikistan would not like to change the borders. But within Afghanistan, there is a worry about ethnic instability. Pashtuns feel that they fought against the foreign colonizing troops, so they also feel that they are the historic rulers of Afghanistan. I think they will have to relent. They will have to lower their expectations, and I think Pakistan should help them. 31 million Pashtuns or Pathans live in Pakistan, and about 15 to 14 million live in Afghanistan. So Pakistan could play a very important role, but Pakistanis feel that they have very limited leverage vis-a-vis Pashtuns, especially the Taliban. After 9/11, lots of Taliban leaders were rounded up by Pakistan and they were handed over to America. So Afghani Taliban don't trust Pakistani government. And same way we have Pakistani Taliban who are much different, and there's quite a bit of disillusionment with them within Pakistan because they've been involved in suicide bombing and killing fellow Pakistanis, Pakistani troops. So my feeling is that we need a new beginning, and this is where they should be helped. I think Turkey has a good standing, but I think Turkey has got so much on its plate already, Iraq, Syria. But I think Turkey could really play a role, and by bringing in countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and Senegal, which are non-controversial for every Afghan, and could help rebuild the country. And China is the biggest investor I don't know what kind of role China is going to play in Afghanistan. On the one hand, they are worried about what they call fundamentalist Islam, but at another level, they want to maintain relationship with Afghanistan because Afghanistan has got lots of minerals, unexplored minerals, and maybe oil and gas, and also Afghanistan connects Central Asia with South Asia and East Asia with West Asia. So it is strategically very important, but I think Afghans and the outside forces, they all have to work together to help, to build peace in Afghanistan. It's going to be difficult, but it is challenging.
Thank you very much,
My
Mr.
pleasure.
Malik. Mr. Malik, thank you. Thank you very much for your watching. Inshallah, we will meet again. But